Sure. Everyone, welcome Inja. Inja is from Croatia, from Split, and I met her at the University of Cambridge, where she also studied, and she was also a postdoctoral research associate there, and then she kept on to do her own startup in San Francisco. It is called New Culture. It is about synthetic food and dairy-free alternative. So she's going to tell you more about her work. And of course, then you can also ask her questions about her research, but also about her career and ask her for some advice. Okay, Inja, the floor is yours.
Great. Thanks, Leo. Hi, everyone. Hopefully we don't have any technical issues. So I have 1 hour for you guys today, and my talk can be, from 15 minutes to 45 minutes, depending on how much detail I go into. So let me know if you want me to finish earlier, and we can have a longer discussion. So good evening to you all. To me, it's morning. I'm in the Bay Area, as Leo said. So let me try to first see if I can just share my screen, and if that all works, fine. And that, or in particular, I'll share my presentation, hopefully. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Huh?
Can you hear us?
I can hear you relatively all right. So I wanted to start with just a very brief intro, because I focused a lot more on my venture, on my company, New Culture, and what we're doing and why. But yeah, first of all, great to be back to the summer school. It's been a very long time for me. It's been actually 10 years since I participated last. So that sounds like a very long time. I mean, yeah, as Leo said, I co-founded and I'm a chief scientific officer at New Culture. And I'll tell you in a minute more about New Culture, but we are a biotech, food biotech.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes?
We don't see your presentation, like the slide preview. We see the presentation itself in the edit mode. So if you can maybe just swap up the screen so that we actually see the preview.
That's strange, because I do see the actual presentation. You were not seeing like full screen?
No, we see the slides like 1, 2, 3, 4 on the side. So we don't see.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's strange, because on my end, I was in the actual, like proper slideshow preview mode.
Yeah, we don't see the slideshow.
You don't see the slides moving?
We see the slides like as if you're editing the PowerPoint, but we don't see the slideshow, how it's supposed to be presented.
Yeah, then something is off, because on my end, I'm in the slideshow, like in a presentation mode, if that makes sense.
You have multiple screens.
You can stop sharing, and then you can share again, but share the whole screen. Don't share the presentation.
Okay, I can do that. Wonders of Zoom. So you want me to share my full screen, basically?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the only way we're going to see the slide.
Then that should help. Okay. How about now?
Perfect.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Thanks, guys, for help. Yeah, so at New Culture, we are a food biotech company that makes actually real dairy, so not dairy-free, to correct Leo. Real dairy, but that does not come from animals. So bioidentical dairy products, in particular cheese, that is not sourced from, growing animals through animal farming, but by actually engineering microbes to make that dairy for us, which I'll tell you all more about, and hopefully how I got into that. But I studied molecular biology for my undergrad in Zagreb, in Croatian capital. I then went to ETH in Zurich for my master's degree in biophysics. And then where I met Leo, I was at Cambridge for my PhD. molecular and synthetic biology and protein engineering. I was then in Cambridge longer. As Leo said, I did my postdoc there as well. And I afterwards left academia and I went to work in actually data consulting in London in a private boutique consultancy. So I worked in business sector as a consultant for nearly 3 years before I left and started New Culture. And of course, I said I'm S3 Vishnian alumnus. I was there when I was in high school myself, which was very, very long time ago. So that was 2005 and 2006. And then I was, throughout years 2012, I was coming back as either swap shop leader or a whole project lead. So yeah, very happy to be back. What I'll just say talked about today specifically is my company and what we do and why, and hopefully answer any of your questions. So why do we exist in the first place? Why does New Culture exist and many other companies like ours these days? We exist because dairy products in general, and in particular cheese, are terribly unsustainable and very damaging to planet and to animals and to humans. And this is something that people don't talk about as much as they should be talking about. And bigger problem is that the alternatives that currently exist simply don't do it for consumers. So I want to walk you through these two parts of the problem. On the left, you can see data from pretty famous by now science paper of Poor and Nemecek from 2018, where they did a very detailed life cycle analysis that's basically for every food product out there, calculating from what's called from cradle to grave. So from very inception and beginning of the production to the consumption of the product, basically how much water is needed to produce the product, how much land is needed, and how much greenhouse gas is emitted. And what you can see on the left clearly, and cheese is highlighted, it is that dairy cheese is basically one of the top three worst products of all food. So all food products globally in terms of its impact on the environment. The other two being worse usually are beef and lamb, so the meat products. It is actually worse in terms of fresh water withdrawals, meaning how much water we need to spend to make kilogram of cheese. We need, for example, more than 100 times more water to make kilogram of cheese than to make kilogram of soy protein, which is pretty ridiculous. As I say, it's third worst in greenhouse gas emissions and third worst in land use. So basically, if you want to eat better for the environment, of course, there are a lot of people who eat better for ethics and living cruelty-free and suffering-free, so not eating any animal products. But if you want to eat better for the environment, you would know that cheese is something to cut out on for sure. Now, the challenge is that cheese is one of people's favorite products. People love cheese, can't give up cheese. And plant-based or vegan cheeses, I don't know if you guys ever tried those. Here in California, there's a ton of vegan food everywhere. It's very popular, very normal these days. People are trying to eat vegetarian or vegan as a mainstream, actually. But vegan cheeses are really terrible. They suck, unfortunately. These are some of the reviews online you can find. It feels like Play-Doh and tastes like nothing. Unfortunately, they're pretty bad category of products. And if you look at surveys from consumers continuously at what animal-free product they would like to see more options in, cheese always gets outvoted by far, meaning people are really not happy with cheese alternatives. And this presents a big opportunity, but also a big problem, as we talked about in the environment. But from a business point of view and an environmental improvement point of view, it's a massive opportunity. So what we're looking at here on the left is basically how people in the US, this is specific to the US, how people in the US consume dairy products. And in yellow is cheese and gray is other dairy lines. And what you can appreciate is that other dairy products have actually been on the decline for years, or at least in stagnation in terms of their consumption per person. But cheese is the only category that's slowly but steadily increasing in consumption. So despite everything we know about cheese, we keep eating more and more cheese, basically. It's a product that's very addictive and craving, and just, people eat it not for health reasons necessarily. People eat it for indulgence, for fun. It's a food that we share with family, that we eat as a snack, that we eat on pizza, that we eat in casual fast food, that we eat everywhere, basically. And so if you look at the total market size, which is in the middle, meaning, market size means how much worth, equivalence of billions of dollars is worth sold every year. There's about $15 billion of milk sold, fluid milk. This both includes animal dairy milk as well as all the plant-based options, okay? So the totality of all sales. Ice cream, yogurt. What you will appreciate is that dairy in total is about $70 billion market, and cheese is basically half of that. So it's crazy. Half of all the dairy market in the US is cheese. And if you now look to the right-hand side, this is a penetration of plant-based products, meaning what percent of this number are taking plant-based products? You can see that people are pretty happy these days with plant-based milks. Like nearly 14% of fluid milk market is plant-based in the US. And this happened in just last 15 years. It was 0% before, or 1%, under 1%. So it exploded pretty ginormously. Ice cream and yogurt are doing pretty well. But if you look at cheese, less than 1%, actually 0.6% of all of this cheese that people eat is plant-based. So that clearly tells us that people are not happy and don't want to eat the plant-based cheeses that are out there. And what we want to do at New Culture is we want to close this gap. We basically want to take as much as possible of that $34 billion market and convert it to animal-free dairy, and thus have enormous impact on the environment and on animal welfare and suffering. And so we really believe that solution is what we're doing, and that's the future. And that is what we like to call cow cheese without a cow, meaning we're delivering on the real deal, but we don't need animal in the equation. And you might ask how that's possible, and I'll walk you through how that's possible. So what I want to convince you is that we are providing this new cheese experience that consumers are definitely demanding here in the US and more globally. And that is that the cheese is healthy and nutritious, so it's high in protein. It has kind of equivalent of the dairy in terms of protein, but doesn't have cholesterol, doesn't have animal fat. It's very low in carbs. And moreover, our cheese is lactose-free because our cheese doesn't come from milk directly and doesn't come from a cow. We don't have lactose in it, enabling massive number of consumers globally. And in America, just 40 million people are lactose intolerant to eat our products. Our cheese is functional and delicious, meaning it melts, stretches, browns, just like traditional mozzarella. And why I'm talking about mozzarella is because I gave it away. First cheese that we're working on is what is called US low moisture mozzarella style. That's cheese that goes on pizza, as you can see on the left. So we want to actually go and take the pizza market. And so our cheese needs to melt and stretch and brown and have the taste and mouthfeel that we all love and crave. But it's animal-free, which means it's sustainable with over 5 to 10 and most likely 10x less water, energy, and land required. So on the left-hand side, you actually see a pizza with our cheese. This is not any other cheese. So when all of our imagery, everything on our website will say 100% New Culture cheese, meaning this is real dairy cheese that's produced without animals. And it's from one of our latest photo shoots where we were actually working with pretty exciting, famous pizzeria here in San Francisco and working out of their wood fire oven and really working with chefs, with pizzerias and showing them that our cheese is the real deal, which has been really exciting. So how do we do this? We do this by what we call power of casein. And we like to joke, not so secret ingredient, because at least here, again, in the US, in the food tech scene, this is the hot topic and most exciting model is casein protein. So while for you guys, it might be first time hearing about it, as I say, it's kind of like out there by now. When I started just 3 years ago, no one talked about it yet much. So this 100% New Culture casein protein powder that I to you, and if you know, you could be convinced, you could think that this protein is basically extracted from milk, that this is like milk protein powder, but it's not. It is bioidentical to milk protein, but it's made from microbes. It doesn't come from animals. And why we are making casein is because casein is the critical component of animal milk, and it only exists in nature in mammals. So in whole living world, only mammals produce casein protein in their milk to basically feed their younglings with it. But what is a secret, kind of treasure to casein is that casein is the one that actually gives properties we love dairy, and in particular cheese. So casein is directly responsible for making these melt stretchy and the texture it has. So literally, you imagine it, if you think of it as a material from a material science point of view, casein aligns into these kind of fibers in cheese and literally gives all the structural properties of cheese. So it's a brainer to understand that if you can make casein protein that doesn't come from animals, you can make phenomenal real dairy cheese that doesn't come from animals. And there is a second class of proteins in milk. Some of you who do exercise might know of. It's called whey protein. It's a minority protein in milk. And whey protein is pretty cool ingredient. And as I say, people, turn it into protein shakes. But whey is a minority protein in mammalian milk, and it does not make cheese. It cannot ever coagulate and make the cheese the way casein does. So at New Culture, we're 100% focused basically on reverse engineering the cheese making by producing casein that's animal free. And this casein, as I say, never existed before except in mammals in nature. And we do this by using what's called today precision fermentation to make casein and to enable us to make our better animal-free dairy cheese. So I want to walk you through step by step of this process. And of course, there's a ton of scientific detail that I can't talk about behind this, but happy to answer questions that I can answer later. So we start by taking a microbe, and by saying microbe, this could be a group of yeasts, for example, Saccharomyces or Pichia. This could be a group of bacteria, like bacilli or lactic acid bacteria. So this could be a group of fungi, filamentous fungi, very popular these days, such as Aspergillus niger or Trichoderma raceae. And we could use these microbes, and we could engineer these microbes genetically. They become genetically engineered organism that specifically is targeted to produce casein protein. So natively, it would not produce casein protein. Natively, it would produce other proteins and metabolites. You will be aware of these, for example, used in brewing, right? Beer brewing. They produce ethanol, they produce flavors. Microbes are used to produce different enzymes that we use in the food industry. Microbes are also used to produce insulin, for example, insulin that we give to people who have diabetes. We used to isolate insulin from pigs. We don't do that anymore. We produce insulin via microbes for last, 30, 40 years reliably. So in a way, we are extending this technology that already exists to say, why are we humans not producing food proteins using this technology? Why are we producing all the other proteins and ingredients, but not food proteins? So we basically take a DNA that's encoding for a casein protein and say you can take a DNA that encodes for casein protein that exists in a cow, but you could also take the one that encodes for a casein protein that exists in a sheep or in a human, you can make human milk, or in a mammoth, which is extinct and doesn't exist. You could take its DNA and you can engineer the microbes to then read this DNA as a code and produce the protein of interest. In our case, that's the casein protein. So now not only mammalian animals can produce casein protein, but microbes are engineered to produce casein proteins. Now, the trick is that they typically in a lab do it in a really small amount, right? And that's pretty useless, producing a few milligrams of protein. We're talking about the need of producing thousands of kilotons of this protein regularly. So the second part is also something that's been developed for, last 50 years in industry, is a fermentation process, which means taking your microbe to grow in a large steel vat and developing optimal conditions to brewing it, basically similar to beer brewing, that will be ideal conditions to spit out the casein, to produce casein. And you feed microbe with some sugar, with some minimal nutrients in this media, and microbe in return produces casein protein for you. And you do this in large tanks. We're talking about 100,000, 200,000 liter tanks in very controlled conditions, when then microbe can produce thousands of kilograms of this protein for you, basically, being a super efficient factory for producing casein. But at the end of that fermentation process, you end up with a mess, right? With a mess of your microbe and your media and your broth and your casein protein, but you only want the casein protein. So the process in the industry is called downstream processing. It's just an industrial term for protein purification that most of you have heard of. Protein basically needs to be purified out, needs to be isolated and recovered after certain purity so that it looks and smells and behaves like that protein I've shown you, the pure white protein. And that's no easy feat. And there's a lot of technology development in that area because we cannot use the methods that you use in the lab, and we cannot use the methods people use in pharma industry, such as column chromatography, because they're ridiculously expensive. We basically rely on very traditional old school bucket chemistry, like pouring things from one thing to another and separating things by their basically biophysical properties. And so developing these processes takes time, and scaling them to large scale and showing they work. But at the end of the day, we come out with a dried pure casein powder, the one I showed you on the previous slide. And when that happens, we basically recreated milk protein powder, and we can then start making our cheese, or actually any other dairy product. But we're very focused on cheese because of its impact on the environment and lack of good products on the market. So we then, everything else that you know of that's in milk, it's basically water, sugar, protein, and fat. That's the core of milk. So if we take water and we take protein that we made, our casein, sugar, we don't want lactose, right? No one likes lactose. We just replace it with a plant-based sugar. And fat, we don't want animal fat that has cholesterol that's unhealthy. We replace it with plant-based fat. So we make this mix of plant-based ingredients with our real dairy, animal-free casein. And we make basically a milk that we can then turn into yogurt or cheese or any dairy products we want. And that's exactly what we've been doing. And really the proof is in the product, right? The proof is in showing you the product and not just talking about it. So I want to show you some very exciting photos that are not released publicly yet. They're not publicly out there yet. They're from a latest photo shoot we did, as I said. And they will be soon released on our new website that we're just rebranding and polishing. So you guys get to see a kind of preview, a sneak peek into that. And so this is our cheese. This is 100% new culture cheese. And we're working in a very famous pizzeria in San Francisco, a kind of, iconic pizzeria with their pizzaiolo, who was just super impressed, as I said, for example, even with the shreddability of our cheese, something that we took for granted and we were not aware of, but actually, for cheese to be able to shred is not trivial. And there's a lot of science, like material science and food science, that goes behind understanding properties that make cheese shreddable. And so plant-based or vegan cheeses, they're actually not shreddable. They're very goopy and sticky. And just the fact that our cheese behaves like real deal and that it's shreddable has just been fantastic and enables pizzerias and chefs to work with it like a real deal. You can see it here coming out of the wood fire oven, just being cooked and kind of bubbling. That's another thing. If you take plant-based cheeses cannot be cooked at high temperatures. So we're literally talking about, 100, 150 degrees Celsius. They cannot even withstand those temperatures, not to mention higher temperatures probably. Plant-based cheeses just burn. They're kind of a starch gel, basically. But real cheese and our cheese, we cook it in wood fire oven at, 400 degrees Celsius, like ridiculously high temperatures. And our cheese performs just like a real deal. So again, this really enables going to traditional pizzerias, going to a traditional environment, and swapping the dish for people without a compromise, without people feeling they have to give up on anything. And they can just say, I made a better choice. I bought cheese that is slaughter-free, that's suffering-free, that's better for the environment, and gives me the same experience. More photos from the photo shoot showing we're working what is called New York style pizza here. When you enter world of pizza and cheese, you learn there's thousands of styles here in the US. Of course, Neapolitan style being very, very famous, but New York style as well. And something everyone salivates about, of course, is the melt and stretch. And you can see here our cheese just coming out of the oven and being cut and stretching. And so, again, we're not praising to our horn. We actually recently had our first public food tasting with a very famous food journalist from San Francisco, Janelle Bitker, who writes for SF Chronicle. And she gave us stellar reviews saying basically this is one of the most stunning animal-free products she's been tasting in the Bay Area. And mind you, she goes around and she tries everything from the newest animal-free burgers, bacons, animal-free seafood, you name it. Basically, Bay Area is home to all of the newest technology for making the future of food, which is going to be animal-free, but giving you the real experience. And more reasons to love our cheese that I mentioned already. It's free from, their free from claims are very powerful, and consumers are starting to care more and more about environment, about their own well-being. So our cheese will never contain the hormones that come from animals that have been fed in certain way. They never contain antibiotics that have been shoved into animals in animal farms. Our cheese never contains lactose or cholesterol. Because it's a real dairy protein, it's 100% bioidentical dairy protein. It means it has all essential amino acids, means PDCAS1 in terms of food nutrition, meaning it's a great nutritional choice. And a lot of plant-based sources don't have this, full, complete protein source, and you have to take multiple different plant ingredients to get there. And our cheese is low in carbohydrates, and I'm stressing this because the plant-based cheeses are primarily made of starch, and they're really unhealthy, and that's not the case for our cheese. And so New Culture has been very fortunate. We exist for just 3 years, and 3 years might sound like a long time, but when you're developing completely novel technology that needs to be, scaled industrially and delivered to feed thousands and millions of people eventually, we're typically talking about 5 to 10 years of development. For drugs, it's like 20 years of development to put drug on a market. But we've been out for 3 years, and we raised our Series A funding just late last year. It was $25 million. In total, we raised over 32 million, actually over $35 million now. And we developed our technology end to end. We have microbes that we engineered, our proprietary microbes. We have our fermentation and recovery process, and we make our own cheese. So basically we do full stack, vertical stack in-house, and we are going to be selling our cheese starting next year into pizzerias here in the US, pending going through a regulatory process, of course. And so these are just some of pretty well-known investors that invested in us. ADM is one of the biggest fermentation companies in the world and biggest nutrition companies in the world. Archer Daniels Midland, CJ's same in Korea. Evolve is actually venture arm of Kraft Heinz, one of the biggest food companies in the world. And these are pretty famous Silicon Valley investors that invested in us. And of course, very importantly, mission-driven investors such as CPT, S2G Ventures, and deep tech venture capital firms like B Partners or Arendt. So we have a pretty good mix of investors who believe in us and who are aware that, it's going to take us another 2 to 3 years to bring our technology to masses and to bring the cost down, because right now it's very expensive what we do. And so for that, we're going to need to raise another $100-200 million in the coming year or two to make our dream a reality and to have our own manufacturing built, so full-on manufacturing. So as I'm saying, what's next? We plan to commercialize our cheese late next year. And because, believe it or not, this casein has been consumed for millions of years by humans, right? We've been consuming milk of animals and human milk. But still, because our casein comes from what's considered novel process, we have to go through a regulatory approval in the US and anywhere in the world to basically approve it's safe for human consumption. And we're actually going through that right now in the US. So we will be regulatory approved next year to start selling in the US. Unfortunately, EU is very conservative and backwards, and their regulatory process will take 5 to 10 years, which is pretty ridiculous. So we won't be selling our products into EU, at least as of now, anytime soon. But if the EU does, come up to speed with battling climate change and understanding how new technologies need to be launched, and if they make their regulatory process more palatable, of course, we would love to come and start selling in the EU eventually and globally. And as I say, we're not stopping at our first cheese. We basically make technology to make any dairy product in the world that doesn't come from animals. And so with that, I'll stop my presentation. And I'll just let you guys, shoot and ask anything you want.
So currently, what is the ratio of like the price of production and the selling price of your cheese? Is it like a big difference? And what are your thoughts? How long will it take for your cheese to be like close in price to the cheese that's created by like animals?
Sure, thanks. That's you speak like investors. That's a key thing they ask about. Right. And it's very important. It's very, very important because if we do something that's just a pipe dream or that's only available to richest people in the world, right, that's pretty useless. Technology needs to be cheap and scalable and affordable to everyone. So it's a very complex answer, unfortunately, but I'll try to break it down into simple categories. Some drivers of cost come from the efficiency of your process, meaning how efficient is your microbe in turning food that you feed it into casein, right? That's number one metric. We call this titer, protein titer. So it means how many grams of casein we produce per liter of media we feed it. That number has to be very high, and new culture is already at a point where we are like 90% there with the number we need to hit to basically make commodity price cheese. So that's phenomenal. Other part is your recovery process. You produce, say, 100 kilograms of casein, but once you are purifying it, you lose 70 kilograms. You only end up with 30 kilograms. I'm making up a scenario. That's what's called your recovery yield. Your recovery yield is 30% in that case, meaning to purify it, you had to put such stringent conditions that you lost most of your protein, because otherwise you pick up garbage with it. Our recovery yield is really high as well, which is also phenomenal. So with our actual metrics on our process, we're 90% there, meaning the process we have today, we are basically ready to make commodity price cheese. Now, the last factor that's really important and that comes only from scaling is how much you pay to people to run fermentation and downstream operations. And unfortunately, you pay almost the same amount of money for doing 1,000-liter production as 100,000-liter production. And takes years to scale from engineering point of view. At each next scale, you scale by factor of 10 to 50 typically, because your physics slightly change. The way that you centrifuge something, the way that you separate something, you have to test that operation at each exact scale, check that your heat transfer, mass transfer works the same way, yada, yada, yada. It's a whole engineering setup. So that's where it's going to take us a while. We are currently working at 1,000 to 10,000 liter scale. When we started, we were in lab tubes, so like 1 milliliter, or even like the well plates, you know. Then we moved to 100 milliliters, then we moved to 1 liter bioreactors, then 10 liter bioreactors. So now we're at 1,000, 10,000 liter scale. But we need to get to 200,000 liters plus per batch to reduce the cost down. So that's going to take, 2 to 3 years time. But if we keep our metrics that we have currently on the process, they're already 90% there to basically be equal with the commodity cheap cheese price. And so we are talking about coming to make cheese at, $6, $7 per kilo of cheese, basically. We think we're going to be already next year at, $20 to $30 per kilo of cheese. So meaning, not thousands of dollars per kilo of cheese like we were today. And when we started, we were at like $500,000 per kilo of cheese. So that's the cost curve we're talking about. And we have a very, very clear path to get there. And again, this is not novel in a sense that insulin today, protein, is made at $10 per kilo. And just as a comparison, our cheese is not only protein. So we need 10 to 15% of our cheeses are protein. So what we're really saying is that if we come to about, $50 per kilogram of protein, we are very much cost competitive. And I just told you, insulin is made at $10 per kilo of protein. A ton of enzymes in industry are made at $15 to $20 per kilo of protein, meaning we can eventually even undercut dairy. We can be cheaper than traditional dairy. But it's going to take time and investment and steel and infrastructure and engineering work to get there.
Marita?
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, what is like the biological novelty of your cheese, of your product, compared to like less appealing products? Because in the beginning you stated that this really that it not being an appealing product to customers is the main problem. So what is essentially the biological difference? Is it casein use in general, or the process, or the microbe using? What makes your cheese appealing compared to others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when you look at the end cheese, so say you buy a block of cheese and product, we want our consumers to know what we do because we want to be transparent, but you don't actually know, you don't even know actually currently how your cows are treated, how they're molested, where they come from, how much garbage goes into that process. You don't know any of that. You go to the shelf, you buy cheese, you eat it, or any other food product, most consumers. So when you look at that cheese, all you care about as a consumer is the performance of the cheese and the taste, basically. That's been clear from all the research. That's how consumers make purchasing choices. So we've shown, and not only us, basically there is 50 years of dairy literature out there. Like dairy is a very serious science, actually, and there's a ton of research done in it in the last 50 years. People have shown that casein protein is the one that gives all these properties, as I said. So casein is critical, meaning the fact that we are making cheese that's bioidentical from protein point of view to real cheese. We're just changing the fat source to be plant-based. We are making cheese that's a real deal. That's the real cheese. And this simply doesn't exist yet at all. All the other products are fully plant-based, right? They come fully from materials that are sourced from plants, and they're nothing to do with animal-derived products or with casein. And now what's really interesting that I maybe didn't mention is that casein protein is super unique, and there is no equivalent to it in the plant-based world. So you cannot take plant protein and replace casein. People have been trying to do this for the last 20 years. So all the plant-based cheeses, they actually are just starch block. They don't have any protein. So that's really what's the novelty. Now, if there was an easier way than to develop very complex technology that involves synthetic biology, genetic engineering, protein production, protein purification, and food science, we would go for that, but there is no. This is the only way to make bioidentical product, is to engineer your microbe to make a bioidentical product, right? That just doesn't exist in nature. And from biological point, why caseins are so unique, some of you who are interested in proteins, majority of proteins in nature, they have something that's called structure, like a fold. We typically talk about secondary, tertiary structure, sometimes quaternary structure. Proteins, basically, most proteins in nature, they're like little machines, and they have a structure, and they're defined by that structure. And almost everything we know about proteins is because of studying their structure and sequence relationship and function relationship. Now, caseins don't have any structure. They're called intrinsically disordered proteins, IDPs. We don't know anything about them in terms of their structural properties, very little in terms of their biophysical properties. They're like unraveled spaghetti. And it's actually much more complex than I presented. There's 4 classes of caseins. They're very hydrophobic, and they have to assemble in supramolecular structures in specific way to be functional. So it's like really complex, the whole biophysics of milk, that again, I can't go into because that would be like another whole lesson just on biophysics of milk. But milk is really complex, basically. And so the way that casein needs to assemble from these unraveled spaghetti and interact with other caseins and make these balls that are called micelles and make stable colloid that milk is, that's what's unique about us. We are enabling all of that. We're developing the technology that says we know how to reverse engineer this system. We can make stable milk, we can make a real cheese, we can make any dairy product because we make casein that doesn't come from animals. And then we know how to use that casein to mimic real casein in milk, basically. Yeah, that's what's novelty from the biological point of view.
Thank you.
Sure.
If it's not too complex to explain, how do you make microbes create casein in large quantities?
Sure. So I don't know what projects you have this year in summer school, but some projects we used to have, and maybe you still have, is where we take microbes and we say engineer them to produce GFP. That's the simplest case, right? They produce a green fluorescent protein. It's just a protein that has certain properties that gives you, certain visualization ability. I give that as example because everyone is probably familiar with that example. So the principle is similar. The engineering is a lot more challenging and complex. We basically take a DNA sequence, a synthetic DNA sequence that codes for a casein protein of our interest. Now the complexity is there's hundreds of different casein proteins you could make from different organisms. So you have to figure all that out. You have to study which caseins will make cheese and how and all of that. But say you figured all that out and you want to make this one particular casein, it's called casein X. You need to take a gene for that casein and you need to insert that gene into the genome of the microbe, of the organism you're working with, in very particular way, in very particular locus. And that microbe all of a sudden is enabled by its own natural translation machinery and ribosomes. It's enabling to produce or translate this new protein. Now, what will happen in start is that you will produce this casein, but you will also produce thousands of other proteins that microbe is making. And microbe will also produce metabolites. Microbe likes to poo and pee, so it will make lactic acid, acetate, ethanol in anaerobic conditions. It will make a ton of metabolites. So what you then do is you basically keep engineering that microbe. You keep introducing genetic changes. Sometimes they're metabolic changes, meaning you have to knock out a certain gene that codes for a certain pathway because you figured out your microbe's making, too much of this byproduct. So basically all of the energy, everything you're feeding to your microbe is going to that waste that you don't care about, instead to your casein. So you have to start figuring out what are the steps you need to do, and you start changing microbe little by little. And that microbe becomes every time a little more efficient to produce casein. You see that you're increasing your casein production and you're lowering production of everything else. So that eventually this microbe is like a super microbe to produce casein. It's been taught, it's been engineered multiple rounds to specifically be efficient at producing casein. But if you wanted to make ethanol from it, it's going to be really bad at doing that right now, even though naturally it would be really good at doing that. So that's kind of engineering we're talking about. It's called genetic engineering, synthetic biology, molecular biology, where you can introduce genes into the genome. You can also delete or knock out genes from the genome, and you keep basically optimizing this organism to become a little factory for producing casein. And what I didn't mention, and it's important to some extent in European Union, not here, is that our microbe is genetically modified organism, but our cheese is not genetically modified, meaning our microbe doesn't end up in the cheese, right? We completely filter out in that separation process. We get rid of the microbe, we get rid of the food it ate, we get rid of the poo and pee it made, and we just recover casein out. Our casein is bioidentical to casein in milk, so it's not genetically engineered. So even though we use genetically engineered organism, the organism doesn't go into the final product. The organism spits out the casein, and we just recover the casein.
Wow, you've got a lot of questions.
It.
Someone who still hasn't asked Marina.
Okay, sure. So what I'm interested in is how does the process of making an idea into a project with this big look? So you said your company exists for about like 3 years, but how long did it take to like get fundings and everything, and how much effort it took?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say, when you speak to, say, many companies, you take 30 different companies and you interview them, you will see a big variety, right? People have very different stories. I'll tell you briefly my story, but I'll tell you some other examples. In our case, myself and my co-founder, Matt, we had this idea, and it was honestly just a theoretical idea on a piece of paper. So we knew this was theoretically possible, because if it's possible to make insulin and make detergents, enzymes for detergents, or make any other product in microbes, it should be possible to make any protein, not just casein, even proteins from muscle and meat proteins, any protein. And it should also be possible to, as I say, scale it up, recover it, and figure out how to make cheese, how to make dairy, if we follow what we know from industry. So in the early stage, we just had this concept that we want to make casein from microbes and do this thing, but we had no clue actually in practice how we would do that. We had to do, of course, a lot of reading, research, speaking with people, hiring people. Now, when you have at that idea stage, some people spend years at that idea stage because, and it happened to me before, I actually had idea for another startup while I was at Cambridge, and that didn't go anywhere. I spent months and months trying to get it to go somewhere, but I just didn't speak to the right people. I didn't find funding, like it never ended up anywhere. But in this case, my co-founder had a bit more experience than me. He already had 2 different startups before. So he told me, we have to get into a startup incubator or accelerator program. I don't know if you guys heard of those, but basically it's a program, there are a ton of them now around the world, where people bring, just like you guys at the summer school, people bring 10 people who have an idea for a company in the same space, and they tell you, there you go, you have 4 months of lab space, we give you lab consumables, we give you some pocket money, and show us you can do something. And if you can do something in 4 months, we'll fund you, basically. So that's what we did. My co-founder knew that there was a most famous, like best established in the world biotech accelerator program is here in San Francisco. And it's called IndieBio. I didn't give them credit in my slides, but I should have. So you guys look up IndieBio. IndieBio started this accelerator like 10 years ago. And IndieBio is interesting because it actually started the future of food field. It started with the idea we can make food in a way that's not damaging to people, to animals, and to the planet. We can make real deal animal-free food. And they started spinning out these companies, first companies in our field. So first ever cultivated meat company, you know, cultivated seafood company that all exist now. It's a big field now. They started through IndieBio. IndieBio gave them initial money. So we applied to IndieBio, and we were applying to a few other programs, and we were lucky. It's a very funny story because we got rejected at all the other programs that are much lower quality, but we got rejected there. But we got accepted to the best one, just accidentally, to IndieBio. And so when we did, we both quit our job overnight, packed our bags, and moved to San Francisco. That's how we moved to San Francisco, because we had 4 months of lab. We had $200,000, which sounds like a lot, but you spend it very quickly in the lab. You need to buy an instrument. It's like $20,000 gone. And we hired one person, and it was me in the lab and this one other person. And we indeed really achieved a lot in those 4 months. And we showed that this works in principle, right? We defined what does it mean to work in principle, and we showed that this is true experimentally. And with this, we were able to go and speak with a lot of venture capital investors in Silicon Valley. And IndieBio has a big network. Again, they know every investor here in the Silicon Valley. So we spoke with over 100 investors in Silicon Valley, and we found people that were interested in investing in us. So that's how it started. And then every time you need more money, it's about 2 years timeline that you plan for. You need to go and raise more money. So you always have to then have some very clear goals and milestones that you define ahead of time. And you say, this is what we're going to achieve. And if we achieve this, you will fund us with this much money. And that's how you keep raising money. So hopefully this helps explain how it happened to us, at least. But there are a lot of companies that, for example, spin out of universities, which you might be aware of. University develops a new technology, and it's really cool technology. And someone comes and tells, hey, you should make a company out of this. And then you have to negotiate with university to allow you to use their technology and all of that. But a lot of successful companies come like this as well. And so it takes maybe years to spin them out. That way, sometimes it's much faster. And then you will hear of stories where people just, it's really kind of a matter of luck a lot, but also just knowing these different avenues where you can find money, right? Some people raise money through government grants, and that's enough for them. But for us, because we know our technology will be costly first few years, it will take us hundreds of millions of dollars, we need to raise like from private investors, right? So kind of like trying and failing and speaking to the right people, having the right network. Like, back then IndieBio was our door to, they gave us the network. And now I help others. When many people reach out to me, I help them and I put them in touch with people, and I, say, okay, you can speak to this and this investor because they might be useful or they might be interested. So then it's kind of just like the summer school, right? It's paying it forward model. You help someone else, someone helped you, then you help someone else. So you hopefully one come back to school and give a lesson, and then it keeps going. So it's a bit like that in the real world too.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask if you see this project becoming like a big thing on the market, like other companies maybe also getting onto this field, or like, like other companies taking over your practice, maybe.
Say again. Sorry, I didn't hear well. Didn't understand.
Do you maybe see this project becoming a big thing on the market, even so big that other companies would maybe take over?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think absolutely. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting my whole life to do this. There is a lot of evidence for this as well, but the future of food really will be animal free. So there is no sustainable way for planet to grow more animals. There's no more land, there's no more water, there's simply that's impossible. And we're talking about having, population boom by 2050. So there is no way we can feed people the way we've been doing it currently. That's completely clear. Now the question is, can we move to fully plant-based food, or can we still allow people to eat animal-like food that doesn't come from animals? And we think this is gonna be easier for human diet to transition to, because humans been used to it for so long. So absolutely, we see this becoming completely mainstream, so that in 50 years time, you would just buy our products. We want to be the biggest dairy company in the world, basically. That's our ambition. We want to be the biggest producer of all dairy in the world. And similar to other startups in our field, I didn't mention, When we started, we were the second company in the whole world to work in anything that's animal-free dairy. There was one more company working on whey proteins, this other class of proteins. And they're really useful because you can make like nice foams, nice emulsions. You can make a lot of dairy products from whey, but you can't make cheese from whey. So there were only two of us, two companies in the whole world 3 years ago. Now there's more than 20 companies that have raised millions of dollars that I'm aware of that are doing the same thing we're doing in every continent from Africa to Asia to everywhere. And then the big companies like Danone, Kraft Heinz, like biggest food companies in the world, they're now investing whole departments to copy what we're doing and do the same thing. And they all want to invest in us and work with us, but we don't want that because they just want to buy us out. They want to buy what we have and they do it. But we don't trust them. We don't trust their ethics. We don't trust their moral integrity. We don't trust what they've been doing to damage the planet for last how many years. So we're not going to sell something to Nestle or to Danone or to anyone, right? But that's what they're doing. The whole world is very aware that this is the technology of the future. So, and not just for dairy, right? For seafood, for meat, for anything, for eggs. There are hundreds and hundreds of companies. You might just not be aware of them because, you know, Croatia is not kind of at the mainstream of what's happening in the world. But there are hundreds and hundreds of companies all around the world. And even in Croatia, there is a cultivated meat company in Croatia. There's a cultivated meat company in Slovenia. There's very successful, you know, several cultivated companies. Cultivated means making bioidentical meat that doesn't come from animal, bioidentical seafood that doesn't come from animal by taking a little biopsy, a little sample from animal and growing it in the tissue culture. So it's a different technology than what we're doing. But these things exist in India, in Africa, in China, in South America. There's hundreds of companies doing this. So yeah, absolutely. This is not, we're not going to stop. Like we can't. We have to find a way to feed people and to feed people sustainably and rightfully and at a cost. So yeah, it's going to take years, like it took years for anything. But we see really this as a you know, biggest revolution of our time is the food revolution. Because you think about it, you need medicine, right? You need doctors for sure. But what do you need more than anything else? You need the food. Everyone needs to eat. Everyone. There's nothing else so precious as food on the planet. And if we deplete our food, we deplete our water, like humanity has no choice. Planet will be fine. That's what people mix up, right? Planet will be fine. Planet will survive. Microbes will survive. Microbes are super resistant. So they'll survive heat, climate disasters, anything. Just we won't survive. Your children won't survive. So if that's important to you, then, you know, you would do something about it. If that's not important, maybe sometimes I do think cynically, we better let humans die because planet is better that way. But sometimes I do think like it's sad for me to do that. So I want to do something else.
So to get away from business side of things, what is the digestive time of your cheese? Is it like general 5 hours for casein protein, like in animal plant based cheese, or is it even lower because it doesn't have cholesterol and lactose?
That's a great question. Biodigestibility of our cheese is very, very similar to the native cheese. So it's pretty much happening on the same time frame. That's a great question. I don't have the data on the cheese itself, like within the matrix that it behaves in. I do have the data on the protein, on casein, because we, of course, have to show in the lab, for example, we take an enzyme like that would chop off our protein into peptides, and we measure how fast it does it, which peptides are generated, and we compare it to animal protein, right? And then we see how the digestibility happens. And so it's because our protein is bioidentical, it really happens exactly the same as for that particular casein. Now, you are right that milks of different animals, they have slightly different caseins, different ratios of caseins. So it's going to be slightly different from type of casein and species to species. But the most important thing is that, yeah, our casein digests on the same time frame. And this is actually a great selling point for weightlifting and bodybuilders and sports performance, because what a lot of people don't know is that whey is much inferior to casein. Whey digests like really, really quickly, whereas casein has a slow release and has this regenerative effect. That's why people actually who are in top performers, they always consume casein. They don't consume whey protein powders. And so our casein is going to be like super competitive to that. And of course, you know, animal-free source of taking, say, your casein protein shake post-exercise for recovery. So that's one of the avenues that a lot of companies, when they speak to us, they're interested in buying our casein to making like protein shakes, for example.
Marita?
Yes. I wanted to ask, so your education, your like European education in molecular biology and also biophysics, how did that provide knowledge in such a specific field of like food technology that is so like more advanced in the USA, and also the technological advancement that you, I assume, faced in the USA? So do you compare this?
Sure. So if you look at what we call our technology pipeline, what New Culture does, right? There's actually 6 distinct areas of science. So no one's going to be expert in all those areas. We start with what we call microbial engineering or strain engineering. And if you narrow that down, a lot of it is genetic engineering and molecular biology. So that's a lot of that I had background in. Second area is biochemistry, general protein and biochemistry and biophysics, meaning you purify the protein and you study like how does it behave at different temperatures, at different pHs? How does it digest? Just like the question was asked, with different enzymes. This is something I had a lot of experience in, even though not on food proteins, right? But I worked on other proteins. So it's all applicable. This is all like translatable, applicable knowledge and experience. Analytical chemistry, we do a lot of analytical chemistry work because we need to analyze to minute detail what's in that protein that's not protein, right? It's not going to be 100% protein. You're going to have some impurities, some water. So that's things that I had more experience with. Things I had zero experience with were industrial bioprocess. Industrial bioprocess means fermentation and the downstream process that all people who study engineering are aware of, or like producing food ingredients, right? But I had no experience with it. I had no clue you can actually grow microbes. You know, for me, it was like you grow microbes in a lab, in like a shake flask. I had no clue that people even, somehow I didn't know at all that that's how you produce things at large scale, is that you grow them in these large bioreactors, and that already exists for like 50 years. So I knew nothing about the whole bioprocess, and I knew nothing about food science, literally nothing. But that's been so exciting for me to learn a lot about and completely immerse myself. And I'm by no means an expert, but I've been leading all that work now, and I can, you know, I can have meaningful conversations with people who are experts in that field, and I can make even decisions scientifically in those fields. So I'm definitely been enabled. Like once you learn 1, 2, 3 areas of science, other areas you learn faster. And what I want to say for food science is to me the most exciting. And even if one day there is no New Culture, I want to work on food for sure, because I wasn't aware how complex food is. And in essence, food science is basically material science, like biophysics of materials, but that also has flavor properties, like flavor chemistry, which is super complex and interesting. So it's like material that you need to eat, right? And so the combination of those is that anyone who comes from material science background or flavor chemistry background, even if they're not food scientists, they'll be part of that deal. So for me, it was all new for sure. And just like reading literature, a lot of literature, hiring consultants, like people who actually know what they're talking about, to teach me, to give me 1-hour lessons, to tell me what I should read, what I should learn, to go to a different course. That's kind of how I picked it up. But I'm by no means an expert. I'll never call myself an expert in any of those disciplines. And I'm more of a generalist who needs to be able to steer the company in the right direction and have the right strategy and support other people. Because now I have experts, I hired experts who lead each of these different verticals, right? And they are the ones who lead that work, and not me.
Thank you.
Marco?
Are there any useful byproducts of casein production by microbes, or is it just most of it is trash?
That's a great question. That's a great question, because we absolutely want to do a lot more work looking into valorizing the waste or the byproducts, both environmentally, but also from monetary point of view. So I can tell you how currently the waste is used in the industry, but that's not how we want to use it. So currently, when you run similar processes to ours, but to produce, say, insulin that I was talking about, or to produce citric acid, or to produce biofuel, whatever, the waste is used as a food to animals. So the waste is used as animal feed. So it's given to animal industry to feed animals. Now, if we do that, we're supporting animal farming, which is exactly opposite to what we believe in ethically and what we want to work in. So we're not going to valorize our byproduct by feeding it into animal farming. But that means that we don't know yet how we're going to valorize. We have to come up with other ways. Can we like do some post-processing, some post-treatment to upcycle it, to make it more valuable? If you think about it, that's a whole kind of research project on its own. And when you are so small like we were, you have to be very focused on your core technology. So we just couldn't work on that. But we absolutely, as we grow bigger, we want to like, work on that either by outsourcing to another company who's expert on upcycling, or working with people externally, or hiring a whole team in-house to figure that out. So yeah, currently we don't have a good idea, to be honest. We currently have to treat it and dump it, trash it. It can be turned into manure. It can be also used as a fertilizer. So it's not only for animal feed, it can be used as fertilizer, but it's mainly used in animal agriculture today.
Any other questions? Are you okay with time, Inja?
Yeah, I think I can have a few more minutes. Yeah.
Marita?
I was just interested with the current size of your company. How many people do you employ in each one of those fields? So how many people participate in production and the product development? Just if you can describe this a bit.
Mm-hmm. So as of today, we are almost 30 people, 28 people in total at New Culture. And out of 28 people, maybe 23, 24 are technical, meaning we only have 3 or 4 people on the business side, mainly to lead HR and commercial strategy and marketing and finance. But out of those, everyone is technical. And majority of people are still more in the development and scale up, meaning we don't have full manufacturing team because we're not yet at manufacturing scale. Once we're at manufacturing scale, we're going to have full manufacturing team as well. So currently it's more teams that are core R&D and then scale up, meaning teams that are scaling the technology. So they are engineers, but they're not manufacturing people yet. And the division is roughly, I would say every team is 3 to 4 people. Some teams are bigger. Bioprocess is our biggest team, fermentation and downstream. That's like 8, 9 people right now. But yeah, that's kind of roughly the division. But what's interesting is when we started, we were just 2 of us. Then our first employee joined us at IndieBio. She took a big risk to join us then, and she's still with us. She's our first employee. She's a really successful biochemist. And in the early days, then we basically hired 1 person per team. So we would have like 1 person in strain engineering, 1 in biochemistry, 1 in fermentation, 1 in downstream, 1 in food science. And then they would be the whole pipeline. They would do everything for their team that they needed to do. And now we're at about 30 people. We're hiring another 10. So we'll be about 40 people by next year. We'll be about 40 people. And we anticipate, to when we raise the next round to be like 70, 80 people in a year time, if things go well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe to finish off your talk, what kind of advice would you like to give to our participants about their future career and life?
Well, of course, I'm going to be very biased, but, biased meaning that's where my heart is at. But, I've been through the journey of studying biology to become what I thought at the time would be like, to cure diseases. That was my original intention. Actually, when I went from high school to study molecular biology, I thought I would want to work in cancer. There's a big history of cancer in my family. It's actually hereditary, yada, yada. So like many of you, hopefully, you do science because you want to do something good to the world. And that was my intention. And I always thought I would be in biomedical field. But I personally discovered, while that's super useful, biomedical field is old now. Like it's been explored. There are thousands of cancer therapies and thousands and millions of people working on cancer. And it's not as unexplored and uncharted. It doesn't have that massive breakthrough impact anymore. It's very hard to have it. And so that's one reason why I would work at something else personally. But then secondly, I discovered, and you all know, that the biggest challenge of our lifetime, right? I sat down to ask myself, what is the biggest challenge of our humanity right now? And that really is the climate change. That's our most pressing issue, because diseases will be exacerbated with climate change, food shortage will be exacerbated with climate, everything will be. You guys can witness changes already in environment there, and it's going to get worse and worse. It's going to get nasty, right? So I decided personally, I want to dedicate all my time and all my life to battle climate change. And there are many ways to do that, not just one way, right? But I would call you to consider to dedicate your science and your life to battle climate change. Some of the ways are working in food technology, of course, making novel foods, something that, again, I'm personally biased and very passionate about because I can see big impact in the world immediately. But there are other areas that are really important: carbon removal, construction, concrete that we use in construction is extremely damaging to the environment. So coming up with new biomaterials for construction is really, really important. Remediation of damaged natural sources in many ways, stopping deforestation. Again, this is all very related to animal farming, unfortunately, because it's been happening because of animal farming. So I would say, if you genuinely want to care about the planet, about yourself, about others, you want to work on something meaningful, at least consider looking into what you could do in climate. That would be my call.
Thank you very much for this inspirational and really amazing talk. And we wish you all the best with your company, and maybe your cheese is going to be the mainstream that we all love and eat. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for all the questions. I hope I could answer them at least somewhat well. And if you guys ever come to US for a visit, or you need something, Leo can share my email, and I can try to help if I can.
I will definitely share your email with them. So thank you very much for your talk.
Ciao. Ciao, ciao. Enjoy your summer school.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.